On March 17, 2017, in the city of Nanaimo, Canada, the body of 16-year-old Makayla Chang was found in an unusual position, shocking the public and drawing national media attention. The cause of death was determined to be respiratory failure following trauma to the neck. The body showed signs of interference. At the scene, police collected a half-smoked cigarette pipe and several suspicious biological samples. When the DNA test results were revealed, the identity of the perpetrator shocked the victim's family, as it was someone they had known and interacted with many times. Who was the heartless killer of Makayla Chang? What was his real motive? Like and subscribe to follow the shocking developments of this disturbing case. On March 17, 2017, in Nanaimo, British Columbia, Canada, 16-year-old student Makayla Chang suddenly went missing after a hangout with friends at a Tim Hortons cafe. She was last seen when a male friend dropped her off at Stephen Bacon's house around midnight. In the days that followed, Makayla's social media accounts remained active, leading friends and family to initially believe she was safe. However, Makayla's grandmother quickly noticed something was wrong. The writing style online didn't resemble how her granddaughter usually wrote. For 5 straight days, Dolly searched on her own, asking all of Makayla's friends, but no one knew where she was. Sensing something was wrong, she immediately notified the police. At the police station, Dolly unexpectedly met Stephen Bacon, who claimed he was also looking for Makayla because he hadn't been able to contact her for days. So what was the relationship between Stephen and the victim? According to Stephen's statement, he claimed he and Makayla were close friends. He even said Makayla called him her godfather. However, Dolly believed the relationship was inappropriate and that Stephen was exploiting her granddaughter for personal gain. According to her, Stephen frequently wrote letters, made phone calls with unusually affectionate language, and had let Makayla sleep over many times. Dolly also mentioned a letter Stephen once wrote to Makayla, in which he called her, "my beloved little bird." Around 8 months before Makayla went missing, Dolly had reported her suspicions to the Nanaimo police. However, police said they could not intervene because there was no evidence Stephen had broken the law, nor were there any reports of threats or coercion against Makayla. When asked, Stephen insisted he knew nothing about Makayla's whereabouts after March 17th and appeared cooperative. According to Stephen, in the early hours of March 17, 2017, after leaving Tim Hortons, Makayla was dropped off at his house on Bruce Street by her boyfriend, Kyle McKinnon. After Kyle left, Makayla said goodnight and vanished the next morning. At first, Stephen thought she had gone back to her grandmother's house. But after several days without contact or her return, he began to worry. Shortly after, the Nanaimo police launched an official investigation. According to her grandmother's description, Makayla was about 150 centimeters tall, weighed 50 kilograms, had short red hair, a lip piercing, usually wore glasses, and sometimes wore wigs to change her appearance. Friends said Makayla was an energetic girl, passionate about music, and dreamed of becoming a singer. She spent most of her time at karaoke events and artistic activities at popular youth hangouts, especially the Tim Hortons Cafe on Wallace Street. She also loved anime, enjoyed cosplay, and had a unique, distinctive fashion style. But behind Makayla's rebellious appearance was a wounded soul, raised in an emotionally deprived environment. She was the daughter of Carrie Chang and Janine Vautour, but had been adopted and legally cared for by her grandmother, Dolly Chang, since she was young. Her mother, Janine, was heavily addicted to drugs, while her father, Carrie, was in and out of prison. At the time of Makayla's disappearance, her biological father was in custody for weapons possession and unauthorized vehicle use. One day, while Makayla was humming a song at Glory Dam Park, she happened to meet Stephen Bacon, an older man with long gray hair and a lonely demeanor. He sat quietly in a corner, attentively listening to her sing. Stephen wasn't outstanding or wealthy, but he had something Makayla deeply craved: attention and care. Things she had never received enough of from her family. After meeting at Glory Dam Park, they began chatting online. Stephen fabricated a story that he was trying to redeem himself after the death of his biological daughter, Allison Bacon. In reality, Allison was still alive. Stephen expressed his desire to legally adopt Makayla. Without suspicion, Makayla believed she had found her ideal father. He soon reached out to Makayla's grandmother, and even the Ministry of Children and Families to discuss guardianship. However, Dolly fiercely opposed and repeatedly warned Stephen to stay away from her granddaughter. This opposition drove Makayla further from her family, and she began skipping school frequently. She spent most of her time with Stephen, even spending the night at his place, while lying that she was with friends. Before her 16th birthday, Makayla once told her grandmother that when she was of age, she would decide for herself where and how to live. Dolly became increasingly worried about Stephen's control over her granddaughter and reported it to the police. However, due to lack of concrete evidence, authorities couldn't intervene. The last time she saw her granddaughter was on March 12th, when she dropped her off at a friend's house. On March 19th, she received a text message from Makayla. Then all communication ceased completely. Initially, police focused their search on places Makayla often visited, including Glory Dam Park. At the same time, police also searched the area around Stephen Bacon's house on Bruce Street. After weeks of searching, all police efforts failed to uncover any clue about Makayla's whereabouts. On March 31, 2017, Dolly continued visiting the Nanaimo Police Department, hoping for new leads about her granddaughter. But all she received was cold and hopeless silence. Under pressure from the victim's family and the community, Lieutenant Gary O'Brien, spokesperson for the Nanaimo Police, confirmed the seriousness of the case. He stated, "Because Makayla has been missing for a long time without a trace, and given the suspicious circumstances, we believe this may be a criminal case." What shocked both the police and Dolly was that, after the initial report of Makayla's disappearance on March 22, 2017, Stephen Bacon left Nanaimo and moved to other provinces. According to the investigation, neighbors said he moved out in a hurry, not long after the report was filed. This behavior raised strong suspicions from police, although Stephen had not yet been officially considered a suspect at the time. Based on Dolly's account of the close relationship between Stephen Bacon and Makayla, police suspected Bacon may have been the last person to see her or knew her whereabouts. One of the initial theories was that Makayla had left home on her own due to conflicts with her family, possibly related to her closeness with Stephen Bacon. However, as time passed with no contact from her, this theory became less plausible. To clarify Stephen's role in Makayla's disappearance, the police's top priority was to determine his current location. The Nanaimo Police Department soon issued a nationwide alert, calling on the public to provide information about Stephen Bacon's whereabouts. During the investigation, the media reached out to Stephen's biological daughter, Allison Bacon. She said she had not been in contact with her father for 2 years and expressed concern about his unstable mental condition. Notably, Allison revealed that Stephen used to call her Little Bird, the same nickname he gave Makayla. By the end of that month, police tracked Stephen to Sudbury, Ontario, and expressed their intent to continue questioning him. Stephen remained cooperative, but the information he provided yielded no significant leads. Police discreetly monitored his residence in Ontario, but found no evidence Makayla had ever been there. The case quickly reached a dead end. Since the disappearance was announced, the community atmosphere had become heavy and tense. Posters were put up, volunteer search groups were formed, and candlelight vigils were held every night, all hoping for one thing: that Makayla would return safely. On May 19, 2017, after more than 2 months of searching, the Nanaimo police received a call reporting the discovery of a body. Around 9:15 a.m. the same day, a family vacationing near Glory Dam Park in Nanaimo was out for a walk. During their walk, they discovered a shallow grave, loosely covered with rocks, emitting a strong, foul odor. As they approached, they were shocked to see part of a decomposing body emerging from the soil. A family member immediately called the police. Less than 15 minutes later, authorities arrived at the scene. Police quickly cordoned off the area and began searching for more evidence nearby. After photographing and collecting evidence around the site, they carefully began to dig, removing layers of soil one by one. The initial examination identified the victim as a girl aged approximately 16 to 18. The body was lying on its left side, curled in a fetal position. At the scene, police found a black flashlight, a black cotton t-shirt, and a half-smoked cigarette not far from the body. All three items were sealed and sent to the lab for fingerprinting, DNA, and origin analysis. Forensics estimated the time of death to be about 8 to 10 weeks before the body was discovered. The head showed signs of mild trauma from a strong impact. The cause of death was determined to be airway compression in the neck area by a thin object with high pressure. The victim was found wearing only a sweater or hoodie. The lower clothing was no longer intact. From this detail, investigators suspected that the victim may have been assaulted before death. After cross-referencing missing persons records, police immediately contacted Makayla's grandmother. Although not 100% confirmed, all signs matched. They hoped the family could help identify the victim before proceeding with a DNA test. Upon hearing the news, she was paralyzed with shock. Her eyes lifeless, hands trembling, she couldn't believe it was real. Despite the overwhelming pain, she made her way to the scene. Facing the heavily decomposed body, she sobbed. "That's my granddaughter. It's Makayla." She demanded that police uncover the truth, find the person who killed her granddaughter, and bring him to justice. Shortly after, forensic experts began analyzing the cigarette butt found at the scene. From the saliva and epithelial cells left behind, they extracted a clear DNA sample. At the same time, they also found suspected biological traces of the killer on the victim's shirt. When compared to the National Crime Database, the results were shocking. The DNA matched Stephen Bacon. From there, police discovered that Stephen Bacon had a criminal history involving previous offenses. All evidence pointed to Stephen as the perpetrator in Makayla Chang's case. Immediately after identifying the suspect, the Nanaimo police dispatched a special task force to Sudbury, Ontario, where Stephen was believed to be living. But when they arrived, the apartment was empty. Neighbors said he had disappeared without saying a word days earlier. A nationwide warrant was issued, and media outlets covered the case widely. But the manhunt yielded no results. Stephen seemed to have vanished from the world. Until September 2019, more than 2 years after the crime, a call suddenly came through the hotline. A resident of New Brunswick reported that a man resembling Stephen Bacon often loitered around a convenience store at midnight. He never bought anything, just stood there and vanished. Nanaimo police immediately coordinated with local authorities. They monitored the area discreetly for 3 consecutive nights. On the 4th night, as predicted, a tall, thin figure appeared. "That's him." One nod and 3 officers rushed in to arrest him. Stephen Bacon did not resist. He remained silent, pale-faced, and was escorted back to Nanaimo that night. In the interrogation room, Stephen Bacon firmly denied all charges related to the case. But when confronted with overwhelming evidence, he began to tremble, lowered his head, confessed to the crime, and recounted the entire chilling incident. On March 17, 2017, after Makayla's boyfriend, Kyle McKinnon, dropped her off at home, Stephen became enraged at their closeness. According to his testimony, Makayla once shared that she was dating a boy 2 years older. Stephen repeatedly expressed disapproval and demanded she end the relationship with Kyle. He believed Makayla was too young and should only focus on being his daughter. This twisted form of control upset Makayla. She once thought Stephen understood and supported her, but she was wrong. During a conflict at his home, Stephen Bacon pushed Makayla to the floor. The impact injured her and caused her to lose consciousness. After placing Makayla on the sofa, about 15 minutes later, Stephen took her life. According to the investigation, he later committed immoral and illegal acts on the corpse, showing extreme emotional and psychological deviation. A few hours after the crime, Stephen used Makayla's phone to impersonate her, logging into her social media and messaging friends and family. He continued this act for days to mislead people into believing Makayla was still safe and just out of reach. On the morning of March 18th, Stephen and an acquaintance named Kenneth Postman, a transport truck driver, moved Makayla's body to a wooded area near Nanaimo Lakes Road. There, they buried the body in a shallow grave. On March 22nd, Stephen went to the police station to report Makayla's disappearance. In front of police, he reassured Dolly that he would reach out if he heard anything. Right after, Stephen withdrew all the money from his account, left Nanaimo by bus, and lived in hiding for a while. He moved across provinces, wandering and cutting off all contact until police tracked him down in Sudbury. Eventually, Stephen was arrested in New Brunswick in 2019. In August 2022, Stephen Bacon pleaded guilty to second-degree murder in connection with Makayla Chang's death. The sentencing hearing took place on April 14, 2023, at the Supreme Court of British Columbia in Nanaimo. Stephen Bacon was sentenced to life in prison, with eligibility for parole after 20 years. Kenneth Postman, the truck driver and friend of Bacon, assisted him in transporting and relocating Makayla's body. However, there is no public information about Postman being charged or convicted for his role in the case. The sentencing of Stephen Bacon closed the case, but left ongoing controversy in public opinion. Many believe the punishment was not proportionate to the crime Bacon committed, especially considering the victim's youth and circumstances. Makayla Chang's family expressed pain and anger, believing everything could have been different if police had listened to Dolly's early warnings. What do you think about this case? Leave your thoughts in the comments below to discuss with us. This video concludes here. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. In 2007, the name Tuen Kit Lee, also known as Dickie, became a horrifying nightmare in Massachusetts, USA, when he broke into a woman's room, restrained her, and assaulted her. Not only that, but what was remarkable was that despite wearing a mask, the victim recognized him due to his foul breath, reeking like a garbage pit. This detail earned him the chilling nickname, the Bad Breath Rapist. Nevertheless, the police, FBI, multiple manhunt programs, and even America's Most Wanted had to get involved in a pursuit that lasted nearly 2 decades. How did he manage to do it? The chase for the foul-breathed predator would become a tense and breathless battle of wits. Don't take your eyes off the screen. This video will uncover one of the most shocking cases in US history. Before we begin, please like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next mysterious stories. Our main character, Tuen Kit Lee, born on April 2, 1971, grew up in a Chinese immigrant family settled in Boston, Massachusetts. His family had a business tradition running a small restaurant in the area. Since childhood, Lee exhibited bizarre behaviors. He had a perverse fascination with watching women, an obsession with controlling others, and displayed suspicious behavior toward female classmates. As an adult, he didn't pursue a respectable career, but instead indulged in gambling, drinking, and living off temporary jobs. By his 30s, he had become more aggressive, committing acts of harassment against women in Boston and surrounding areas. The police investigated some cases, but there wasn't enough evidence to charge him. Perhaps this made him more confident and reckless. He believed he would escape punishment as he had before. But this time, he was wrong. On February 2, 2005, in a small alley in Quincy, Massachusetts, inside his family's restaurant, a horrifying incident occurred. That night, after the restaurant had closed and everyone had left, one person remained, a young female employee, 22 years old, working at the restaurant. She was a kind girl, new to the city, without many friends. This made her the perfect prey in the eyes of a predator lurking in the shadows. In the silent night, Tuen Kit Lee quietly entered the back area of the restaurant. Using a spare key, he unlocked the employee's room, because this was his family's restaurant. He then sneaked into her bedroom, approached her with a knife. As the victim was deep in sleep, he suddenly pounced on her, restraining her. "Stay silent, or I'll kill you right here." Panicked, the girl tried to resist, but he was too strong. He tied her to the bed, wrapping duct tape tightly around her wrists against the metal frame, ignoring her desperate struggles. With his victim subdued, the beast within him awakened. As part of a premeditated plan, he carried out the assault on her. 30 minutes later, he vanished into the darkness, leaving the victim immobilized on the bed. Her mouth was gagged, preventing her from screaming, and her limbs were bound tightly. All she could do was lie there, waiting for help. The next day, February 3, 2005, when she didn't answer her phone for hours, her boyfriend began to worry. He rushed to the restaurant, knocked on her door, but got no response. Sensing something was wrong, he forced the door open, and the scene before him left him frozen in shock. His girlfriend was tied to the bed, covered in bruises, too terrified to speak. He rushed to untie her and immediately called the police. Less than 10 minutes later, investigators arrived at the scene, took the girl for medical examination, and officially launched the investigation. The police collected evidence from the room. They found ropes, duct tape, and dried blood on the bedsheet. More importantly, they discovered fingerprints on the doorknob, footprints on the floor, and short male hairs. Although rescued, the victim was still mentally unstable. Despite that, she tried her best to provide a full testimony. But one particular detail caught the investigators' attention. The perpetrator wore a mask that concealed his face, yet she still recognized him. Not by his voice, not by his build, but by the overwhelming stench of his breath. The unique, horrifying odor that struck fear into her. It reminded her of someone who had worked at the restaurant before, Tuen Kit Lee. An emergency search warrant was issued. The police raided Lee's residence, but he was gone. Inside his room, they found a black leather mask, ropes, and suspicious items. Additionally, forensic experts confirmed that DNA evidence found at the scene was a perfect match for Tuen Kit Lee. The information was released to the public. Massachusetts police officially issued a warrant for Lee's arrest on charges of sexual assault and unlawful detention. Public outrage erupted. The media relentlessly covered the case. Local television stations broadcast every detail of the crime. On social media forums, one particular detail from the victim's statement haunted everyone. "He had a horrible breath." The victim's words were quoted everywhere. Investigative journalists followed this lead, searching for people who had interacted with Lee. Many confirmed that he always had severe bad breath, a repulsive, fishy odor. And so, the nickname, the foul-breathed predator, was born. American newspapers ran sensational headlines everywhere with titles like, "The rapist with a terrifying breath spreads fear in Massachusetts," "The fetid breath of a wanted criminal," or "The foul-breathed predator, America's nightmare." The Massachusetts police did everything they could to track him down for 2 years, and finally he was arrested at a hotel in the outskirts of Boston. When taken into custody awaiting trial, Lee displayed an oddly calm demeanor, showing no signs of panic or fear. On June 15, 2007, the trial officially began at Quincy District Court, Massachusetts. Lee entered the courtroom with an eerily composed attitude. In front of him was his victim, the woman he had assaulted that fateful night. She trembled at the sight of the man who had ruined her life but bravely stood to testify. The prosecutor presented undeniable evidence. DNA from the crime scene matched Lee. His fingerprints were found on the door, and security cameras recorded him near the scene that night. There was no escaping the truth. The jury withdrew to deliberate. It took them 2 days to review the evidence before reaching a final verdict. Everyone was awaiting justice, but one man had no intention of waiting: Tuen Kit Lee. Morning of June 17, 2007. The city was still in anticipation, but elsewhere someone was already preparing to disappear. At 5:30 a.m., Lee left his home in Quincy, carrying a small backpack and a forged passport. He was neither rushing nor panicking, because this was a meticulously planned escape. At 6:15 a.m., a black taxi stopped in front of Logan Airport, Boston. Lee stepped out, pulled his hat low, and tried to avoid attention. Instead of checking in at a regular counter, he headed straight for the private flight terminal. Massachusetts police sensed something was wrong. When the trial began and the defendant was missing, the judge immediately issued an emergency arrest warrant. A special task force was mobilized to hunt down Lee. 8:30 a.m., a checkpoint at Logan Airport received orders to monitor Tuen Kit Lee. Security personnel checked passenger lists, no one under Lee's name was found. It was highly likely he was using a fake identity. 9 a.m., SWAT teams stormed the private airport terminal. But it was too late. The small plane carrying Lee had already taken off, leaving Boston. Destination: California. Lee had escaped. He officially became one of America's most wanted fugitives. Despite this, the trial proceeded in his absence. And then a historic verdict was reached. Tuen Kit Lee was officially found guilty. But no one could sentence a man who had vanished. All efforts to capture Lee failed. No one knew where he was. Lee's lawyer later argued that his client fled because he feared returning to prison where he had been assaulted before. A weak excuse. After escaping from Massachusetts in 2007, the FBI never stopped searching for him. Lee's name remained on America's Most Wanted list year after year. His case was updated annually, and his image appeared on America's Most Wanted, but there was no trace of him. The police even offered a $10,000 reward for information leading to his capture. In 2023, an anonymous tip changed everything. A reliable source informed the U.S. Marshals Service that Tuen Kit Lee was alive and hiding in California. Not only that, but he had secretly contacted his family after years of being missing. This information surfaced from Instagram when Lee accidentally posted a public photo of himself online. Perhaps he had grown overconfident in his ability to hide. Investigators later revealed that the phone calls originated from Contra Costa, California. Immediately, the FBI, U.S. Marshals, and state police from Massachusetts and California coordinated to track him down. They analyzed traffic cameras, examined suspicious financial transactions, and investigated anyone with ties to Lee. A new name surfaced: a wealthy woman, owner of a chain of flower shops in Contra Costa, living in a multi-million-dollar mansion in Diablo. This woman was found to have connections with a man using a fake identity. Investigators secretly surveilled the mansion and placed hidden cameras along nearby roads. They spotted a man with striking similarities to Tuen Kit Lee, though his appearance had changed. He had shaved his head, grown a long beard, and dressed like a successful businessman. By this time, facial recognition technology had advanced significantly. Police extracted images of the man and compared them to Lee's older photos. The match was 98%. There was no longer any doubt. After 17 years on the run, Tuen Kit Lee had finally been found. Authorities did not want to alert him, so they decided against storming the mansion. Instead, they waited for the perfect moment to act. They had to capture Lee without giving him another chance to escape. Morning of May 28, 2024. Special forces received intel. Lee and the woman were about to leave the mansion in a black SUV. Unmarked police vehicles surrounded the area. Everything was set for the takedown. 9:30 a.m., the SUV left the Diablo mansion. A group of undercover officers trailed them from a distance, waiting for the perfect opportunity to strike. 10 a.m., the SUV approached a deserted intersection. At that moment, two police cars suddenly swerved in, blocking the front and rear of the vehicle. A loud siren blared. FBI, step out of the car immediately. Lee immediately panicked. He never expected that he had been discovered. Armed officers rushed forward, pointing their guns inside. The woman panicked and raised her hands in surrender. But Lee remained calm. He smirked and spoke with confidence. "I am Michael Wong, a businessman from Hong Kong," he said nonchalantly. His fake documents were ready. He had undoubtedly rehearsed for this moment for years. But the police had irrefutable evidence. They demanded his fingerprints. Sweat began to form on Lee's forehead. He knew the game was over. A heavy silence filled the air for a minute. Then he let out a deep sigh, bowed his head, and whispered, "All right, I am Tuen Kit Lee." "Tuen Kit Lee, you are under arrest for rape, kidnapping, and escaping a sentence." An officer read him his Miranda rights as he was pushed into a police vehicle. After his arrest, the police took his fingerprints. The data was immediately sent to the National Criminal Identification System. Within minutes, the results appeared on the screen. A 100% match with Tuen Kit Lee's records. There was no doubt. The fugitive who had evaded capture for 17 years was finally caught. Tuen Kit Lee was officially detained at the Northern California Federal Prison. He sat motionless in the interrogation room, his face expressionless. There was no escape this time. An extradition order was immediately issued. U.S. Marshals prepared to transport him back to Massachusetts, where his 2007 conviction still loomed over him. He had been found guilty, but he had never faced the punishment he deserved. This time, justice would not let him slip away again. As the investigation continued, the mystery of his 17-year-long escape began to unfold. After fleeing Massachusetts in 2007, Tuen Kit Lee moved to New York. He used fake documents and avoided areas with security cameras. He didn't use credit cards, never made phone calls, and didn't check into hotels. He lived like a ghost, meticulously ensuring that no trace of his presence could lead the police to him. But New York was not his final stop. After a few weeks in hiding, he bought a long-distance bus ticket under a false name and headed straight to San Francisco, California. In 2008, inside a small cafe in San Francisco, Lee met an Asian woman, an entrepreneur who owned a thriving chain of flower shops. She was a successful businesswoman with social status, but lacked a personal life. Lee quickly ingratiated himself, gained her trust, and gradually became a part of her world. There was no marriage certificate, no property in his name. Lee remained invisible in the legal system. He had no official income, didn't file taxes, and left no bank transactions. The police couldn't track him because, on paper, he didn't exist. However, as the years passed, he made one fatal mistake. He carelessly posted a public photo of himself on social media. That small slip-up sealed his fate. When the police informed the woman of the true identity of the man she had lived with for over a decade, she broke down in tears. She couldn't believe it. How could it be? The man she trusted, shared her life with, was one of America's most wanted fugitives? But when police presented the evidence, photographs, case files, and victim testimonies, she could no longer deny the truth. When asked if she had ever suspected anything during their years together, she only shook her head. He always acted normal. There were never any signs. He had deceived the entire world. But more importantly, he had deceived her, the one who had loved and trusted him. She agreed to cooperate with the police, providing details about his life in California. Thanks to her information, investigators were able to piece together his entire journey from his escape in Massachusetts to his eventual capture. June 2024, Tuen Kit Lee was officially extradited to Massachusetts. The plane carrying him landed at Boston Logan Airport late at night under heavy U.S. Marshals protection. The next morning, the police escorted him to Norfolk County Court, where he had originally been tried in 2007. Sitting in the courtroom was the woman he had victimized in 2005. She was no longer the weak girl of the past. Today, she stood up to expose the man who had once destroyed her life. The prosecution presented the entire case. They reopened old records, displayed DNA evidence, witness testimonies, and investigation reports from the FBI, Massachusetts, and California police. There was no room for denial. Prosecutors not only charged him for the 2005 assault, but also added charges of fleeing justice, using a false identity, and evading capture for 17 years. After everything, it didn't take long for the court to reach its final verdict. For the crimes of assault, kidnapping, escaping justice, and using a false identity, Tuen Kit Lee was officially sentenced to life imprisonment without parole. Tuen Kit Lee lowered his head, saying nothing. No more smirks, no more defiant stares. For the first time in his life, he had lost control over everything. Immediately after the trial, he was escorted back to a Massachusetts prison. The cell door closed behind him, and this time, it would never open again. The foul-breathed predator would spend the rest of his life behind bars, facing the consequences of his crimes. His story serves as a warning to anyone who thinks they can escape justice. But it is also a powerful message to victims. Speak up. Don't let criminals walk free. This video concludes here. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video. In February 1983, North London was shaken by a horrifying crime that sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom. According to reports, a serial killer had brutally murdered dozens of victims. He once claimed he could have killed 500 people if he had not been stopped. It all started with an investigation into mysterious human remains found in the sewers. At that moment, the London police realized they might be dealing with one of the most horrific cases of the era. The perpetrator was none other than Dennis Nilsen, one of the most notorious serial killers in British history. So, what really happened? How did he carry out these gruesome murders? Hit like and subscribe to our channel as we uncover the full truth. Around 4 p.m. on Tuesday, February 8, 1983, residents of Cranley Gardens repeatedly complained about their toilets being unusable due to severe pipe blockages that had lasted for 5 days. Under pressure from residents, the landlord urgently contacted Mike Carton, a plumber, to inspect the issue. Less than 15 minutes later, Mike and his colleague Jim Alec arrived. They decided to open the sewer cover connected to the city's drainage system, hoping to find the cause of the blockage. As soon as Mike opened the sewer cover, a strong, foul stench immediately hit his nose. He quickly grabbed a flashlight and carefully stepped into the darkness. The deeper Mike went, the stronger the strange smell became, a scent he had never encountered before. As he approached the junction between the building's pipes and the city drainage system, he saw a pile of unusual waste. It didn't look like human waste, but more like decomposing flesh and fat. Both men realized this could be a serious issue for the building. They decided to call their supervisor to report the situation. However, their boss did not believe them, assuming they were mistaken due to the darkness. Eventually, Mike and Jim Alec requested to re-examine the site the following morning when there would be enough daylight to properly assess the problem. At 9 a.m. on February 9th, Mike and his colleague returned. However, to their surprise, the strange substance was no longer there. The sewer was now clear, and their previous suspicions seemed to have been dismissed. Their job was considered done, and everything appeared to be resolved. However, Mike and Jim Alec had no idea that while they were discussing the flesh and fat that had clogged the pipes, a resident named Fiona Priest had already called the police. Fiona Priest suspected that the substance might be linked to a murder case. She reported that the previous night, she had heard the footsteps of a man entering the manhole and had no idea why he was there at such a late hour. At 5:40 p.m. on February 9th, 1983, in London, Chief Inspector Peter J. received a report about human remains found in the drainage system of an apartment building in Cranley Gardens. According to the investigation, the pipes led up to an apartment on the 3rd floor belonging to a man named Dennis Nilsen. The detectives waited outside the apartment until Dennis Nilsen returned, then informed him that they were there to check the blocked pipes. They then asked for permission to go up to Nilsen's private room for a more discreet conversation. As soon as they stepped inside, they were immediately hit by a strong, strange odor filling the entire room. With years of investigative experience, Inspector J immediately recognized the source of the disturbing stench. He looked straight at Nilsen and coldly asked, "Where is the rest of the body?" Nilsen showed no surprise. He calmly replied, "In the wardrobe." Jay wasted no time and immediately ordered Assistant Inspector Jeff Chambers to check. Chambers opened the wardrobe, revealing decomposed body parts in front of them. Dennis Nilsen was arrested on the spot and escorted to a police car. Inspector Chambers looked straight at the killer and asked sternly, "Are the remains in the apartment from 1 or 2 people?" Nilsen pondered for a moment before coldly responding, 15 or 16, I think." At the police station, detectives assigned a lawyer to assist Nilsen during the interrogation. However, he showed no hesitation, answering every question directly without paying attention to the lawyer's advice. Dennis Nilsen calmly admitted to killing at least 15 people. He did not even remember all of his victims' names. He described in detail where he had hidden the bodies, You will find more in a tea chest in the bedroom. Then in the bathroom drawer, the remains of 3 people are still there. He continued, at 195 Melrose Avenue, N2, you'll find 12 or 13 more from 1978. Dennis Nilsen said he had met his victims only once at completely random locations, on the street, in bars, or in public places. According to Nilsen, some of the victims were homeless and drug addicts. He continued answering questions about the victims' identities, stating that all of them were male, but of unknown age. Nilsen stated that, of the 3 bodies found at Cranley Gardens, the last victim had been killed 3 weeks earlier, while the others had been dead for about a year. Naturally, the older bodies had nearly completely decomposed. The forensic examination concluded that the bodies from Dennis Nilsen had been dissected with a high level of skill, making it relatively easy to differentiate the parts. The head of the last victim had been boiled to the point of being unrecognizable. Although most of the fingers were severely decomposed, one remained intact enough to identify fingerprints. Additionally, the autopsy provided information about the cause of death. Initially, the victim was believed to have died from strangulation with a thin object like a fishing line. However, the autopsy revealed that the victim's lungs were filled with water, indicating drowning as the cause of death. Furthermore, the forensic examination revealed that the victim had hepatitis B, a common disease among heroin addicts. As for the bodies at Melrose, Nilsen handled them differently. He lived on the ground floor, with plenty of storage space beneath the floorboards and a backyard. After clearing the space, the bodies began to decay and emit odors. On weekends, Nilsen would clean them himself to avoid being overwhelmed by the stench. Nilsen would pull the bodies from under the floor, place them in plastic garbage bags to keep things tidy, and then move them to the kitchen for dismemberment. Over time, Dennis Nilsen became highly skilled in dismembering bodies, developing proficiency through repeated practice. Once everything was done and the area was cleaned, he would wrap the body parts in an old carpet and burn them. To mask the smell, Nilsen would place a tire on top, allowing the rubber to overpower the scent of burning flesh. Nilsen added in a calm voice, "I had to do it. My house had no more space." The interrogation continued with Dennis Nilsen's statements about how he murdered his victims. He stated that the killings always took place at his home, and all the victims voluntarily came to his apartment. After 2 hours of questioning, Nilsen's statements meant nothing unless he provided clear names to confirm the identities of the 15 people he had killed. Therefore, the police set out to verify the names, while Nilsen was held in custody until the evidence could be confirmed. News of the discovery of human remains in the drainage system quickly spread through the community. The media captured images of the police collecting evidence at the Cranley Gardens apartment. However, the investigation at Dennis Nilsen's workplace did not go smoothly. His colleagues refused to believe he could have committed such atrocities, so the police needed authorization from higher-ups to proceed with the search. Additionally, police discovered that Dennis Nilsen had once been a police officer in Willesden, northwest London, but left the force in 1973, 10 years before the remains were discovered. In a subsequent interview, Nilsen himself confirmed this information. He explained that he hadn't mentioned it before because, while he was a police officer, he hadn't killed anyone, so he believed it was irrelevant. However, Inspector Steve McCusher whispered to Inspector Peter J. about a disturbing rumor involving Dennis Nilsen. He said that the real reason he was expelled from the police force was because someone caught him pleasuring himself in the morgue. The interview returned to discussing names, starting with the last victim, who was known to be Scottish. Nilsen thought for a moment before blurting out, "Stephen?" His name was Stephen. This statement worried the lawyer, as his client was incriminating himself too quickly. However, Nilsen ignored the lawyer's advice. He simply wanted to end this and politely asked the lawyer to leave. The interview continued with Nilsen's confession about murdering Stephen. He recounted meeting the victim outside a McDonald's, where Stephen had gone several days without food. Stephen was a homeless man, around 25 years old. Nilsen couldn't resist offering help. After buying Stephen a meal, he took him home. They drank, laughed, and shared their past experiences. Stephen revealed that he had been kicked out of his home at 12 years old after his parents discovered he was using drugs. Later, his parents tried to find him, but he had already fallen too deep into addiction. Unwilling to be controlled, Stephen decided to run away with a group of drifters. For over 10 years, he wandered the streets of London, surviving on the generosity of strangers. The story paused when the inspector demanded that Nilsen provide the victim's full name. Nilsen struggled to recall his surname, a name with a distinctive Scottish ring. Then he remembered: Sinclair. Detectives quickly searched for information on the name Sinclair Stephen. According to Nilsen, Stephen Sinclair was a drug addict who likely had a prior criminal record. Not long after, the police received a report. By cross-referencing records of individuals with prior arrests, they confirmed the last victim's identity as Stephen Sinclair. This evidence conclusively proved that Dennis Nilsen was responsible for the murder of Stephen Sinclair. Detectives Peter J. and Steve McCusher visited Mr. and Mrs. Sinclair, Stephen Sinclair's parents, to inform them of their son's death. Although they had nearly disowned Stephen, hearing of his death still brought them immense grief. At the same time, the media began spreading news about the murderer who preyed on men, Dennis Nilsen. To understand the motives and origins of Dennis Nilsen's cruelty, investigators delved into his past, step by step uncovering the dark childhood and twisted mindset that shaped his path to crime. Our main character, Dennis Nilsen, was born in 1945 in Fraserburgh, a small town in northern Scotland, where most people relied on fishing for a living. Dennis Nilsen was the second child in the family, which had a total of 3 siblings. He had an older brother named Olaf Jr. and a younger sister named Sylvia. His mother, Elizabeth White, was a housewife, while his father, Olaf Nilsen, was a Norwegian soldier stationed in Scotland. After getting married, Dennis Nilsen's parents moved in with his maternal grandparents. Over the next 3 years, the Nilsen family welcomed 3 more children. However, when Olaf completed his assignment in Scotland, the couple decided to separate. Olaf returned to Norway and only occasionally visited his children. Aside from those visits, no one knew where he was. As a child, Dennis was very close to his grandfather, Andrew, who spent all his time taking care of him. However, Dennis Nilsen's fate took a sudden turn when he was 6 years old. The passing of his grandfather was a devastating shock for the child. Seeing her son fall into despair, Elizabeth, like many mothers, tried to explain to Dennis why his grandfather had died and what the afterlife was. In Dennis's eyes, his grandfather was merely asleep for a long time and had moved on to a better place. When Dennis turned 14, he realized he was homosexual. Dennis felt discomfort from those around him, especially from his older brother, Olaf Jr., who often mocked and ridiculed his sexuality. Olaf Jr. called Dennis hen, a term meaning girl, in the Scottish dialect. At 16, Dennis was an excellent student with good grades, but he still decided to drop out of school. Dennis announced to everyone his intention to join the military. During the interrogation, Nilsen revealed that his time in the army was the happiest period of his life. The environment around him intensified his desires, but to avoid suspicion, Dennis often hid in the bathroom, indulging in his fantasies alone. Additionally, his twisted mind increasingly craved more intense physical experiences. Dennis began engaging in excessive physical intimacy and sought ways to get close to his male colleagues to satisfy his urges. At night, he would sneak into his comrades' rooms and secretly touch their bodies while they were asleep. It wasn't long before his strange behavior was discovered, making him the target of bullying and group violence, accompanied by cruel insults. However, instead of feeling ashamed or hurt, he seemed satisfied. He even enjoyed the abuse from his fellow soldiers. After 3 years of training in the army, at the age of 19, Dennis Nilsen was deployed to Germany for his duties at a military base. There, Dennis frequently had bizarre dreams. He saw his comrades unconscious or dead. In these dreams, Dennis would perform disturbing acts on their bodies. Sometimes, he imagined himself as the one who was unconscious and being exploited. To prolong these strange dreams, Dennis began abusing alcohol. He drank more and more, to the point where his comrades often had to carry him back to his quarters to rest. Nilsen always hoped that the soldier bringing him home would take advantage of him while he was intoxicated. However, all of this remained confined to his imagination. At night, he lost himself in his twisted fantasies. During the day, he was exhausted and frustrated, sobering up just enough to continue his military duties. This sense of unease followed him for a long time, at least until he completed his military service in Germany. In 1973, Dennis left the army and enrolled in police training. During a visit to the morgue for an autopsy examination, he discovered within himself a disturbing fascination with the lifeless bodies before him. On one occasion, Dennis was caught in the act by a colleague who reported him. This incident led to a reprimand from his superiors and caused his colleagues to distance themselves from him. Eventually, Dennis decided to resign. After that, Dennis transitioned into recruitment work for manual laborers. He performed exceptionally well and quickly rose through the ranks, becoming a senior manager at a prestigious company in London. Thanks to his managerial position, Nilsen rented a house at 195 Melrose Avenue. Before signing the lease, he requested exclusive use of the garden. The landlord agreed, as he saw nothing unusual about a tenant who enjoyed gardening. Dennis frequently visited gay bars, seeking casual relationships. However, these encounters did not bring him any emotional connection. Instead, they left him feeling increasingly empty. Until Dennis Nilsen met David Galligan, a 33-year-old man. This time, he seemed to take the relationship more seriously. Dennis invited David Galligan to move in with him at 995 Melrose Avenue, North London. However, despite living together, Galligan denied any homosexual relationship between them. When David Galligan left, Dennis gradually lost control, sinking into a spiral of alcohol, desire, and loneliness. Afraid of being abandoned once again, Dennis began to nurture the idea of killing his lovers to keep them with him forever. On December 30th, 1978, at the Bricklewood Aram Bar, Dennis began his hunt for prey. His first victim was Stephen Dean Holmes, a boy only 14 years old. After meeting Dennis at a bar and following him home, Holmes unknowingly became the first victim in his horrifying killing spree. The next morning, when Holmes tried to leave, Dennis immediately restrained him with a phone charger cord, wrapping it around his neck. He then pressed Holmes's body into a bucket of water, holding him down until the boy was completely lifeless. Afterward, Dennis dragged Holmes' body next to his bed. He continued to sleep, talk, and even have dinner with the boy as if he were still alive. A few days later, he decided to hide Holmes' body under the floor, in the crawl space designed for heating and insulation. This very spot became Holmes' secret tomb, where Dennis kept the boy's body for 8 months. Until summer, in early August 1979, the oppressive heat filled the entire room with the stench of decomposition. Unable to hide it any longer, Dennis decided to burn Holmes' body in the garden. After the death of Stephen Holmes, Dennis fell back into loneliness. He had no one by his side, and the search for a new companion began again. This time, he happened to meet Andrew Ho, a Chinese student who had come to England for academic courses. Andrew was strong-willed and enjoyed bold relationships. This excited Dennis, making him believe he had found the right person. But as soon as Andrew stepped into Dennis's apartment, he was suddenly attacked, with Dennis tightening a tie around his neck, choking him. Fortunately, Andrew managed to fight back and escape. Immediately after, he reported the attack to the police. When the police arrived to investigate, Dennis adamantly denied all accusations. He claimed it was just a playful game between the two. The police reviewed the statements and concluded that it was just a misunderstanding between two individuals. Eventually, they ended the investigation and left. The second known victim was Kenneth O'Cannon, a 23-year-old Canadian student visiting London in December 1979 to see his friends. At a bar, Kenneth met Dennis, who, after a few drinks, appeared to be extremely friendly. Taking advantage of his local knowledge, Dennis offered to show Kenneth around London. Kenneth quickly agreed. The two had an enjoyable afternoon before Kenneth followed Dennis home for dinner and drinks. After finishing the meal, Kenneth sat in an armchair in the living room, wearing headphones and listening to music. Seeing this scene, Dennis's obsession resurfaced. He knew that one day, Kenneth would have to return to Canada, and they would never see each other again. Dennis couldn't let that happen. He pretended to ask Kenneth if he could borrow the headphones. The moment Kenneth removed his headphones, Dennis suddenly wrapped a cable around his neck, tightening it until he lost consciousness. Afterward, he treated Kenneth like an inanimate object, casually sleeping next to the victim's body throughout the night. The next morning, Dennis dressed Kenneth's body, placed it in a wardrobe, and went to work as if nothing had happened. Every evening after work, he would take Kenneth's body out of the wardrobe, place it on the sofa, and quietly converse with his friend. He drank, watched TV, and listened to music as if Kenneth were still alive. Dennis even convinced himself that Kenneth was the perfect friend because he couldn't resist or leave him. A few weeks later, Kenneth suffered the same fate as Stephen. His body was hidden beneath the floorboards. Kenneth's body began to decompose. Dennis tried using air fresheners and insecticides, but all efforts were in vain. With no other option, Dennis was forced to dispose of all his friends. By the time he was arrested, his victim count had reached at least 15 people. The media called him the British Jeffrey Dahmer, comparing him to the infamous American serial killer. On February 10th, Dennis led the police to Melrose Avenue, pointing out 3 locations in the backyard where he had burned the victim's remains. On February 11th, 1983, Dennis Nilsen was officially charged with the murder of Stephen Sinclair. He was transferred to HMP Brixton to await trial. On October 24th, 1983, Dennis Nilsen's trial took place at Old Bailey, where he faced 6 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. He pleaded not guilty, but the evidence against him was undeniable. Prosecutors described him as a cold-blooded killer who showed no remorse for his crimes. His detailed confessions about how he killed his victims sent chills through the courtroom. On November 4th, 1983, the jury sentenced Dennis Nilsen to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 25 years. The public was outraged, demanding changes in the legal system to ensure that serial killers like Dennis Nilsen would never have a chance at parole. In 2018, Dennis Nilsen died at the age of 72 due to health complications while imprisoned at HMP Full Sutton. When news of Dennis Nilsen's death was announced, most people in the UK felt relieved. They saw it as an inevitable and well-deserved end for a brutal serial killer. Thank you for following this story. Like, share, and subscribe to our channel to never miss more terrifying and mysterious crime cases. Remember, no matter how frightening the truth is, it must be told so that justice is always